Welcome to Caveman Chronicles Podcast, episode 1.5. We're going to be recording the audio on Facebook. If you're watching this on YouTube and there's any reference to the video, it's not going to make any sense to you, but that's why. This episode is going to be the reading of a blog, my UFO encounter. It was published by Pamela Morris. She sent it to me. Now, I'm going to read this on the podcast along with some comments prior to about my own experience. Bear with me. Reading this, I've blown it up to 150% to see it, but the color of the letters, like a turquoise, it's just atrocious. It's very hard to see. I wouldn't have picked like a blue color for the lettering, but that's just me. Anyways, the story itself seems great, and along with her personal experience in this, there's also, I believe, 2 news articles, one from, like roughly, I think it was 1937, and then one from 1960 something, and these were also the witnessing of UFOs, and not just by random yahoos, but there was I want to say both Tioga and Tompkins County Sheriff were involved in multiple calls, on the matter, but we'll get to that with the story. So first, before I start reading Pamela's blog, let me get into, there was my UFO experience, if you will, but if you want to go back to the one podcast listed on YouTube on the channel, it is going to be the one with UFO, UAP, and unexplained phenomenon. If you fast forward about 3/4 of the way through that, there'll be myself telling my own experience. So I'll let people go and do that if they actually see this. But I'm not going to add it into this and make it longer or try to take away from the spotlight. So with that said, episode 1.5, you can go to the previous YouTube video, UFO, UAP, unexplained phenomenon, about 3/4 of the way through, listen to my own experience, and that brings us to here. Published by Pamela Morris, My UFO Encounter. Okay, now let's blind ourselves with this color of lettering. Alright, Pamela writes, I believed in a lot of very different things in my lifetime. Some I still believe in, others not so much. Some of these beliefs would be considered pretty normal, like, believing in God and angels, astrology. That's normal, right? That the earth is round like a ball, that gravity works, the evolution of animals, including us humans. Other things could be described as weird by your run-of-the-mill man in the street. New Age things, crystals, ghosts, Ouija board, tarot cards, and of course aliens and the celestial vehicles, UFOs. With the recent release of U.S. government documents pertaining to UFO, UAP, and said government's inability to identify the unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, in many cases, I thought it was time I released my own official document about the matter and my personal and shared experience with what I believe was an extraterrestrial craft. She goes on to write from there. There was a report in the Binghamton Press, I'm assuming that's the Press and Sun Bulletin, back in July of 1964 about several UFO sightings in Tioga County, New York, which is where I'm doing this podcast from, of which my hometown of Berkshire is part of. This vehicle, as reported, was quote-unquote very bright and of a pointed nature. It was also described as quite large, quoted, and was seen flying at treetop level. Those reporting the incident said no sound came from the object, which gave off a bluish-type light. The witness of the event was an off-duty village police officer. Now, in my opinion, that brings some credibility to the whole thing. I can't imagine a police officer bringing up a UFO allegation just to make himself look, quote-unquote crazy for nothing. Off-duty village police officer. Later, the 2 officers who had been called in to report the incident also saw 2 objects moving across the sky in an irregular pattern. The deputies stated that these objects did not appear to be any known aircraft. That's a quote. The craft seen by the off-duty officers sure does sound a lot like the one my friend and I witnessed 25 or so years later. At least its pointed nature and no sound aspects. There was another, much more famous sighting in 1964 that described the aircraft as egg-shaped. An account of this can be easily found here. That's a link in this reading. 1964 UFO landing by Gary Wilcox. Even if you're not local, people should look that up. It's a pretty interesting story. Here's a newspaper clipping. I'm assuming pertaining to that. Let's read through it. UFOs sighted in Tioga County. That's going to be Tioga County, New York, United States, for anybody watching that's unfamiliar or listening to, depending on which platform. Press Bureau. Owego, Newark Valley area residents have reported spotting unidentified objects in the vicinity of East Berkshire late Wednesday night. Tioga County Sheriff deputies reported that Mr. and Mrs. Fred Howland of Newark Valley, went to the home of Howard Horton, a Newark Valley police officer, about 10 p.m. Wednesday and reported seeing a flying object in the East Berkshire area near Parsons Road. Sheriff's men said the object was described as very bright and of a point in nature. It also was described as quite large and was seen flying about treetop level. This is all quoted above also, we just read through. According to the report of the deputies, the object disappeared behind the trees and down behind a hill. Those reporting the incident said no sound came from the object, which gave off a bluish-type light. Sheriff's men reported also showed that Mr. Horton reported that he had received 3 earlier calls about the object, but the persons calling did not disclose their names. Deputy Gene Helmers and Charles Hammond, who went to the area where the objects were reportedly seen, but found nothing. However, the deputies later noted 2 objects moving across the sky in an irregular pattern. The deputy said the objects did not appear to be aircraft. The deputies did, however, observe aircraft in flight and said the object they were watching appeared to stop until the aircraft was out of view. That's quite interesting. That was a newspaper clipping. Then we go back into the story, going even further back to 1934. So we've jumped from the mid-60s to the mid-30s here. So going even further back to 1934, there was another Tioga County incident in which a 6-year-old by the name of Edith saw what she thought was at first a Greyhound bus parked in a cow pasture just outside of Owego, New York, near Lounsbury. That's a couple of towns in the southern tier of New York State, United States. Her parents and she were returning home on a Thanksgiving night of that year after spending the day with her grandparents. Edith's father pulled the car over at the child's excitement, and both he and Edith got out of the car and saw a long gray and round on the ends, but she remembered that the windows weren't like a regular bus. These windows were darkened and bulbous. She could even see some shadowy forms moving around inside. Shortly after, an 85-year-old Edith encountered the object. Suddenly rose up, however briefly, over the pasture, and as she put it, it just melted away. That was a quote from Edith. It just melted away in reference to the object that they originally thought was a Greyhound bus in a cow pasture in Tioga County, New York. She goes on, it wasn't until very recently that I had a specific date to go with my personal encounter. Excuse me, for decades I couldn't remember what year, let alone the specific date this took place. One would think that in all the decades I've been keeping a journal since 1977, I'd have written this event down, but searching through book after book has revealed nothing. No mention, not a word about it. I knew it was between 1988 and 1994. Now this is interesting because the early 90s was my experience as well. And as I said, you'll have to go to the podcast on my YouTube page listed as UFO, UAP, and Unexplained Phenomenon 3/4 of the way through, and you will get another story that took place in the early 90s. But she goes on to say here, between 1988 and 1994, because I wasn't living with my parents. I moved out in the summer of 1988, nor had I moved to my current home, which happened in February of 1995. However, thanks to Facebook message, I put out a swarm of other witnesses stepped forward publicly and in private DMs to let me know they too had seen the same craft the same night, Saturday, the 13th of May, 1989. One childhood friend even had a newspaper clipping from our local paper, the Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin, that confirms that, which was feeble at best when describing what so many of us in my hometown and nearby towns actually saw that night. And that takes us on to the newspaper clipping. And before I read this here, let me say I apologize. At times it's hard to read this because the backlit screen and the atrocious coloring of the letters, it's like blinding me. I should have put on my screen glasses, but I didn't. Okay, here we have UFO drifts across southern tier skies. It's a newspaper article written in the Press and Sun Bulletin in 13th of May, 1989. All right, let's see here. They didn't know what they saw. They just knew they saw it. Area law enforcement agencies, Binghamton radio station WAAL, and the Press and Sun Bulletin received several calls Saturday night from people claiming to have seen an unidentified flying object. Callers' description differed slightly, but most agreed the object or objects had red and white lights and traveled east between 10:15 and 10:40 p.m. The UFO was seen between Berkshire, Whitney Point, and Green, callers said. State police at Kirkwood, the Broome County Sheriff's Department, and Edwin A. Link field officials received similar reports, but could not identify the objects. From that clipping, she goes on to continue writing, "It was a warm spring night when we saw it. Nobody was wearing a coat or even a light jacket, and I remember the leaves on the trees being full and green. It was cloudy, overcast night too, as I recall it. Myself, boyfriend, and best friend had been at my parents' house in Berkshire, New York, a small town about halfway between Ithaca, located at the southern tip of Cayuga Lake, and Binghamton, New York. Whatever business or social gathering we'd been taking part in together, most likely wedding plans, we three were walking to our cars, shouting our good nights to my parents who stood on the front porch and saying our goodbyes to my childhood friend, when someone happened to cast their eyes toward the southeastern sky, toward Binghamton, and said, 'What's that?'" Okay, now you probably can't see the map very well if you're viewing this on Facebook, for obvious reasons, and if you're listening to this on YouTube, I will put the map up on the screen, so you will in fact see it. But it's showing the trajectory of the alleged craft or crafts going from Binghamton, heading northwest, just passing east of Ithaca. And it's a pretty simple map with arrows. You'll be able to tell by looking at it. So we'll just continue on from there. The craft was massive, at least as wide as a football field is long, and moving very slowly toward us from above. I'm not good at measuring distances visually, but it was flying low, much lower than any of the more familiar planes I'd seen go by. The craft flew directly over our heads at a steady pace in a perfectly straight line. Its triangular shape blocked out the dark clouds high above. A singular light glowed at the underside pointed tip of the vehicle. More light could be seen along each branch of the V-shaped vessel. Nothing but darkness appeared along the narrow sides. I don't remember the lights having a color to them, just white. Others have said the front light was red. It was silent. There was no humming sound, no buzzing, no low rumbling, no pulsing whirl, nothing, absolutely nothing. Perhaps that was the creepiest part of it all, this lack of sound. We stood there, utterly stunned at what we all were seeing. This here is what I assume is a diagram of what it would have looked like, the V shape with the lights under it. There may be other images here as well. Like I said, you can't see this on Facebook, but all of the images from this section, including the shape and the diagram and any pictures that may accompany it, will be up on the YouTube video. And that's going to be episode 1.5. We continue on from the diagram of what she and her friends had seen. Yes, right there, author's recollection of her UFO UAP sighting circa 1989. So that sighting was just before my experience. It's in my UFO UAP podcast prior to this one. And she goes on, this is the last couple paragraphs, I believe. Whatever this craft was, it was in no hurry. It passed overhead, continuing its slow, steady, silent pace toward the northwest, maintaining the same elevation and speed the entire time. We stood and watched as long as we could, 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not sure if the lights went out or if it simply got too far away for us to see them anymore, but eventually it was gone. Once it was out of sight, we all just looked at each other, verifying what we'd witnessed. My parents must have seen it too, but to be honest, I don't remember them coming down the porch and into the driveway with us to witness it. Furthermore, neither of them has ever mentioned the event in later years. My friends would later report that when she got home, which was less than a mile's walk from her parents' house, that her sister, who lived next door to her, reported to have also seen the craft. She goes on from there to the closing paragraph. In the days that followed, there was a very brief TV news report on the event, and the above article in local papers appeared. That was the last I've heard any official reports on it. Years later, people who hadn't actually been witnesses told me that they'd read it was just some Japanese paper lanterns set aloft, or some said helicopters flying in formation, to which I call, in quotes, bullshit. Japanese lanterns don't fly in formation, and helicopters aren't silent. What we saw was a craft of this world or another, I don't know, but still a huge, silent, solid airship, perhaps even an updated version, the latest model, if you will, or the one spotted all those years prior in 1964 in the same area. If anyone out there reading this also saw the same unknown vehicle flying in the skies between Binghamton and Ithaca, New York in May of 1989, post your story in the comments below, or contact me in a personal message if you'd rather not go public with your experience. I'd love to hear about the encounter. That is the end of the article. Now, if you're on Facebook, I'll make mention to it, but I may post links as well. I don't know. They will be on YouTube, however. That was my UFO encounter by Pamela Morris. I will put links to this blog on Facebook and YouTube. Let me turn a light on here because staring at that color lettering on that screen is brutal. But I'll leave the links. You can contact her. Just in closing, that was Pamela Morris's recollection of a craft she had witnessed. She put that onto a blog. I will give the link. In there were also 2 historic cases, one in the 30s and one in the 60s, also part of the article. And to hear mine, which took place just after hers in 92-ish, that was also in the southern tier of New York, Broome County, just east of where this all took place. And that's going to be in the UFO UAP blog that's prior to this one, which you will see on the YouTube page. Anyways, thanks again for listening to the rambling. Excuse me. I found it interesting. But Caveman Chronicles Podcast Episode 1.5. I'm going to save this on Facebook and post it to YouTube. Thanks, everyone. Cheerio.